I never considered myself a vengeful person. To be honest, I always thought revenge was for the weak or for those who didn't know how to forgive. As a kid, my mom taught me that the best response to an insult is to be happy and move forward. She used to say, "Jake, you can't control what others do, but you can control how you react. If someone hurts you, just step away and live your best life." And I believed that for years. I watched people spend years consumed by hatred and thought, how can anyone be that dependent on a grudge? But life, has a way of throwing surprises that make you rethink even your strongest beliefs. Sometimes you face a situation where just walking away means admitting defeat, letting someone step all over you without consequences. And in those moments, you realize that forgiveness is great, but justice is better. And if you serve justice with a smile, it's no longer revenge. It's an art form. I'm just a regular guy from Texas. My name's Jake. I'm in my 30s. I live in Austin. I work as an architect, and I lead a pretty quiet life. At least now I do. But in the past, I've had a few instances where someone crossed the line, and I realized that sometimes the only way to keep your self-respect is to fight back. But I never did it screaming and foaming at the mouth. No, I prefer a different approach, cold, calculated, and above all, with a sense of humor. Because when you laugh at a situation, it stops being scary, and you gain control. This story isn't about me destroying lives for fun. It's about how I defended myself against people who tried to take advantage of my kindness, my naivety, or my weakness. I'll tell you 3 cases that changed my view on justice. The first is about how my favorite headphones were stolen and how I taught the thief a lesson. The second is about a girl who tried to ruin me financially, thinking I wouldn't notice. And the third is about a boss who fired me on false charges and ended up paying $500,000 for it. But let's take it one step at a time. Make yourself comfortable. This is going to be a long one, but I promise you'll smile at least as much as I did. It all started 10 years ago, when I was a sophomore in the architecture program at the University of Texas at Austin. I was young, full of ambition, but with an empty wallet. Student life is a constant battle between studying, working, and sleeping. I lived in a room on the outskirts, rented from Mrs. Garcia, an elderly Mexican woman with a kind heart and a sharp tongue. She rented rooms to students and fed us tacos on Tuesdays. She thought I was too skinny and always slipped me an extra portion. "Chiquito, you're like a matchstick," she'd say. "If the wind blows, you'll fly away." I'd laugh, but honestly, I was barely making ends meet. My scholarship was small, and I worked part-time at a bar, hauling beer cases and pouring drinks. But the money went to rent and textbooks, and I could rarely afford anything beyond the essentials. So my greatest treasures were my Bose Quiet Comfort headphones. I won them in some silly online contest, but to me they were priceless. They cost almost $300, a fortune for me. I listened to music on them while working on my drawings. They drowned out the noise of neighbors who loved blasting country music at full volume on weekends. They were my little escape from the chaos of the world. When I put them on, everything else faded away. I heard only the music and saw only my projects. They were my anchor in the storm. I carried them everywhere. In my backpack, in my jacket pocket, they were always with me. I was so used to them that I never even considered losing them. So when one morning I walked into my architecture history class, put my backpack on the floor, and reached for my headphones an hour later when the lecture ended, they weren't there. At first, I thought I'd just put them in another pocket. I searched my backpack several times, checked every compartment, rummaged through my bag, then my jeans pockets. Empty. My heart sank into my stomach. I knew that if I told my mom, she'd freak out. We were already barely scraping by, and now a valuable item was lost. So I decided to handle it myself. First, I walked through every lecture hall I'd been in that day. I looked under chairs, checked the bulletin board, asked the security guards, nothing. I even tried to get administration to show me security footage, but they said that without a police report, it wasn't possible. I didn't want to go to the police over headphones, so I decided to wait and search on my own. I put up flyers with a photo of the headphones and a reward offer, but no one responded. For 2 weeks, I lived on edge, constantly looking around, hoping to spot my headphones on someone. I even bought cheap Chinese earbuds on sale for $20, but they were terrible. The sound crackled and hissed, and I hated every minute of using them. They kept falling out, and I was furious at myself for being so careless. I'd almost made peace with the loss. I stopped searching, stopped hoping. I decided it was a lesson. Next time I'd be more careful. But fate, it seems, loves a good joke. One day in drawing class, held in the same room where I usually sat, I noticed something strange. There was a guy in the group named Tyler. He always walked around with messy hair that he clearly dyed an unnatural platinum blonde, and with this pretentious thoughtfulness that was irritating. He always talked about his unique vision and how he felt architecture. We weren't friends, but we sometimes sat at the same table. He often wore old headphones, and I never paid them any attention. But that day he was sitting in the corner, listening to music on headphones that looked exactly like mine. My heart started pounding. I moved closer, trying not to attract attention. Looking closely, I noticed a characteristic scratch on the left ear cup. I'd made it myself when I dropped the headphones on the asphalt outside the library. That same scratch ran along the edge and looked like a little lightning bolt. I was sure those were my headphones. I walked up to Tyler and said, "Hey, let me see your headphones." I had the same pair. He handed them over casually, without looking up from his phone. I turned them over and saw my sticker with the initials JM, which I'd placed on the inside. I even remembered sticking it on, carefully so it wouldn't peel off. These were definitely them. I didn't make a scene. I calmly went back to my seat, put the headphones in my backpack, waited until Tyler left for a break, and just left him without his music. But inside I was seething. How dare he steal my headphones and bring them to the same room where I sat? The sheer audacity. He must have known I could recognize them. Or did he think I was such an idiot that I wouldn't notice? This was an insult not just for the theft, but for my intelligence. I decided that simply taking my stuff back wasn't enough. I needed to make sure he remembered this lesson forever. I started watching Tyler. I found out he was working on his final project, a series of architectural illustrations for a city exhibition held at the end of the semester. It was his ticket to grad school, his chance to get a recommendation from the renowned professor Mr. Harris, who was supervising the project. Tyler constantly bragged that his work would be the best in the class, that he would revolutionize modern architecture, and that he'd definitely get noticed. I heard him discussing details with the instructor, proudly showing off his sketches. I knew he kept all his drafts, all his drawings, and all his materials in a large thick folder stored in a cabinet in our workshop. He never made digital copies. He said paper gave him real inspiration, while screens killed ideas. I decided I needed to find that folder. The next time we were working in the workshop, I waited until Tyler left for lunch. The workshop was empty, and I walked over to his cabinet. The lock was broken. He'd complained about it but never fixed it. I opened the door, and there, among old magazines and empty paint cans, lay the folder. I pulled it out, flipped through it quickly. It was genuinely impressive. Dozens of sheets, neat lines, colored sketches, detailed floor plans. You could tell he'd put a lot of time and effort into it. But that didn't stop me. I found an old spot in the storage room behind the easels, where broken furniture and boxes of dried-up brushes were kept. It was dark and dusty, and no one ever looked in there. I placed the folder on the top shelf, where it was practically invisible, and went back to the workshop. The next week was quite a spectacle. Tyler noticed the loss the very next day. I saw him darting around the workshop, opening every cabinet, looking under tables. He interrogated all his classmates, asking ridiculous questions. "Did you see my folder? It was right here. Someone must have taken it." His face was red. He was gesturing nervously, and his usual pretentious thoughtfulness vanished, replaced by desperation. Mr. Brown, our instructor, was also baffled. He addressed the whole group. "Guys, work doesn't just disappear. If someone accidentally or jokingly took the folder, please return it. This is a serious project, and Tyler's grade depends on it." I sat at my desk, pretending to draw, and tried not to smile. Inside I was trembling with tension, but I kept my composure. Tyler approached me several times. First he asked if I'd seen his folder. I calmly said no. Then he asked suspiciously, "Jake, do you know anything? You were here when I left." I shrugged and said, "Tyler, if I were you, I'd check your own things instead of looking for someone to blame. Maybe you misplaced it yourself." He clearly suspected something, but couldn't prove anything. His face showed a mix of anger and helplessness that amused me. He walked away, muttering something about injustice. Another 2 weeks passed. Tyler never found the folder and had to start a new project from scratch. He worked day and night, barely sleeping. I saw him in the library past midnight, his eyes red, drinking liters of coffee. He lost weight, looked haggard, and his famous disheveled appearance no longer looked stylish, just pitiful. But I felt no compassion. He stole from me and he had to pay for it. I didn't think he'd start a new project. I thought he'd give up or ask for an extension. But he was stubborn, I'll give him that. He created new work in a short time, but it was weaker, more superficial, without the depth he'd put into the first one. When the end of the semester came, I knew it was time to close this chapter. I went to the workshop, walked into the storage room, and pulled out the folder. It was still intact. I opened it one last time, looked at his efforts. It was genuinely good work, but it meant nothing to me. I carried the folder to the dumpster outside, near the building entrance. I left it there, not hiding it. The next morning, the janitors found it, but it was ruined by rain. The pages were soaked, the colors ran, and the paper turned to mush. Tyler didn't get his recommendation. His work never made it to the exhibition, and he failed the course. I heard he dropped out of college, never finishing. Someone said he moved to another city and got a job at a furniture store, sketching cabinets. I didn't feel sorry for him. Many years later, I sometimes remember that story, and I don't regret it. I'm not proud of it as a great deed, but I don't feel guilty, because he stole my thing and I stole his time, and that was fair. I didn't ruin his life, I just taught him a lesson. And in that moment I realized something important. Sometimes you need to show people that their actions have consequences. And if you do it with a smile, even revenge becomes amusing. When I think of his confused face, I don't feel gloating. I feel a slight satisfaction that the world became a little more just, and I know that in the future, he'll think twice before taking what isn't his. This wasn't just a response to theft, it was a lesson for myself. I can defend myself not with shouting, but with quiet strength. Now I have new headphones, better, more expensive, and I guard them like the apple of my eye. But those bows, the first ones, will forever remain in my memory as a symbol that sometimes small revenge is the sweetest dessert. And when I see someone trying to cheat or steal, I just smile and remember that folder in the dumpster. So, friends, remember, don't mess with a guy who has a sense of humor, because he might turn your offense into art. And in the end, that art will hang in his personal gallery of victories. But that's just the beginning. Ahead of us are 2 more stories, much more serious and perhaps even more amusing. Because when I met the girl who tried to bankrupt me, I used not just logic, but her own weapon against her. And when my boss fired me on false pretenses, I used the system he so despised. So stay with me, it's going to get interesting. And in the meantime, hit like if you think justice sometimes needs a helping hand. And subscribe so you don't miss the rest. It's only going to get better. So let's jump ahead a few years. The first story ended with me getting my headphones back and leaving one arrogant student without a degree. But as you might expect, life goes on. After university, I started working, slowly getting on my feet, and it seemed like I'd learned all my lessons. I became more cautious, less trusting, but the heart, as they say, isn't made of stone. And then one fine day, I met her, the one who turned my life upside down. And as you've probably guessed, not for the better. But let's take it one step at a time. This happened when I was 24. I was already working as a junior designer at a construction firm, but in the evenings I still bartended. Old habits and extra money never hurt. The bar was called The Broken Compass, a loud, down-to-earth place with live music on Fridays. That's where I met Amanda. She was a waitress, bright, sassy, with long chestnut hair that always fell into her face, and a tongue so sharp it could cut steel. She wore silver earrings shaped like little skulls, and always smiled like she knew some secret she was about to reveal. We quickly hit it off. She could talk to anyone, and I was charmed by her energy. A couple of weeks later, we started dating. 6 months later, I rented a bigger apartment so we could live together. She moved her stuff in, a couple of suitcases and a cat named Bucks, who was just as cheeky as she was. Black, fluffy, with yellow eyes, he immediately claimed my favorite couch and looked at me like I was a guest in his house. But I was happy. I had a girlfriend, a cat, a job, and I felt like an adult. First, everything was perfect. We made plans, buy a car, travel to Europe, open a joint bank account. I was head over heels and didn't notice the little things that now, looking back, seem like huge red flags. For instance, she almost never paid for the apartment. I always covered the rent and utilities out of my own pocket. She would only occasionally buy groceries. When I asked, she'd shrug and say, "My paycheck's late," or "I'm helping my mom, she's sick," or "I took out a loan, but I'll pay it off soon." I didn't think much of it. I thought we were a team, that one person takes care of one thing, the other takes care of something else. But over time, her debts grew and my savings shrank. She also knew how to spend money on makeup, clothes, spa trips she called stress prevention. I didn't see a problem until one day I opened my bank statement and realized that over the past 2 months I'd spent almost $4,000 on her. That was a huge amount for someone just starting their career. I decided to have an honest conversation with her. I prepared dinner, lit candles, hoping for a calm dialogue. But when I mentioned finances, she exploded. Her eyes flashed, and she started yelling that I didn't trust her, that I was too stingy, that she did everything for me and all I did was count money. She cried, threw napkins at me, and I gave in. I apologized and said I was just worried about our future. She calmed down, kissed me, and said everything would be okay. I believed her. That was my biggest mistake. Things only got worse. She took my credit card for emergencies. I said, only for groceries if I was late at work. A month later, I found charges on the account from expensive jewelry stores, spas, and designer clothing sites. When I asked, she said they were gifts for her friends and that she'd pay it back. But she never did. Then she started asking me to take out a loan in her name for our car, as she put it. I agreed because I believed in our relationship. The loan was for $15,000 and I was supposed to pay. She promised she'd take over the payments, but the first installment was paid by me again. And so it continued. Every month I paid either the loan, the bills, or her purchases. I started noticing that almost nothing was left in my account, while she kept talking about temporary difficulties. At some point, I began to suspect she was cheating on me. She often came home late, said she'd been out with friends, but they smelled not of wine and perfume, but of some strange cologne. Her phone was always within reach. She even took it into the shower. When I asked to borrow it for a minute to check a map, she'd snatch it back nervously and yell that I was invading her privacy. I decided not to push, but something inside me had already cracked. I increasingly found her sitting in the kitchen with her phone, smiling at the screen, then quickly hiding it when she saw me. The breaking point came on an ordinary Tuesday. I came home from work an hour early. My boss got sick, and they let us leave early. I quietly entered the apartment, trying not to make noise, and saw Amanda on the couch. She didn't notice me because she was completely absorbed in a text conversation on her phone. She had that same mysterious smile on her face. I walked closer and, without a word, took the phone from her hands. She shrieked and tried to grab it back, but I was already reading. It was a conversation with some guy named Brandon. They were discussing how she was about to dump this sucker, how she was milking him for every last penny, and how they'd already planned a trip together using my credit funds. I read enough. Everything inside me clenched, not from anger, but from icy realization. All these months, I hadn't been a lover. I'd been an ATM. She used me, my kindness, and my trust as a tool for her own enrichment. I smiled. I don't know how I managed it, but I smiled, handed her phone back, and said, sorry, I just wanted to check the time. Anyway, I'm tired. I'm going to take a shower. She looked at me suspiciously but couldn't tell what I'd seen. I went into the bathroom, closed the door, and sat down on the floor. No tears, just cold calm. I decided I wasn't going to make a scene. Scenes are for people who need emotional release. I wanted victory. I decided to play her game, but on a bigger scale. I started gathering information. I copied passwords from her laptop while she slept. She was so overconfident that she stored everything in plain sight. I got access to her email, social media, and even the online banking accounts she used for her schemes. Within a week, I had a dossier. I found her fake resumes, where she'd claimed diplomas and work experience she never had. I found conversations with her friend where they discussed how she scammed her ex-boyfriends. I found return fraud schemes. She'd order expensive electronics online, return them, but pocket the refunds, and the stores couldn't track it because of fake receipts. This was classic petty fraud, which in Texas could easily get you up to 2 years in prison. I also found her debts to microfinance institutions. She owed about $8,000 to various lenders with exorbitant interest rates. She'd hidden all of this from me. I decided to strike. I took screenshots of all her conversations, all the fake documents, all the schemes. I compiled everything into a folder on my cloud drive. Then I sent a copy to her employer. She worked as a manager at a small boutique clothing store. I wrote an anonymous letter, attached the screenshots, and said that this employee was engaged in fraud and that her activities could damage the company's reputation. 2 days later, she was fired for violation of corporate ethics. She came home in tears, saying it was a mistake, that someone had set her up. I nodded sympathetically. A week later, I sent the same documents to the police, adding a statement about credit card theft and loan fraud. I wrote that she had used my personal information without my knowledge to obtain loans. The police opened a case. When she found out the police were investigating, she went pale. She begged me to withdraw the complaint, said she'd return all the money, that she'd change. But I was calm. I told her, "Amanda, you chose your path. Now you're walking it." She screamed, threatened, even smashed a plate against the wall. But I didn't flinch. She packed her things and moved to a friend's place, and a couple of days later I received a notice that she'd been charged with fraud. The case didn't go to trial. She reached a pretrial agreement, returned some of the money, and got probation. She was required to pay restitution and complete a rehabilitation program. But her reputation was destroyed. We had mutual acquaintances and word spread fast. She lost her job, her friends, and eventually moved to another state, Florida. I didn't hear from her for years, until one day, when I was in Florida for an architecture conference, I stopped at a supermarket for a bottle of water, and behind the register stood her, older, with a puffy face and a hollow look. She scanned my items without looking at me. I took my bag and said, "How's life, Amanda?" She looked up and recognized me. Her face twitched, but she said nothing. I smiled and added, "You've always been good at counting other people's money. How much do you think I won in this game?" She flushed but didn't respond. I walked out of the store, feeling lightness and even a hint of pity. Not for her, but for the version of myself that had once loved her. This story taught me that not everyone is honest, and that sometimes trust needs to be earned, not given in advance. But most importantly, I realized that even in the dirtiest situations, you can keep a smile and your dignity. I didn't destroy Amanda. I just gave her a chance to see the consequences of her actions. And if she ever comes to her senses, she might understand that the easy path always leads to a dead end. I moved on, but with new experience, now I always check my bank statements and never let credit cards out of sight. But as they say, the third time's the charm. And the third story, which happened during my full-fledged career, surpassed the previous two in scale and financial payoff. You've already guessed what I'm talking about. The boss who fired me because my twin brother drank a beer at a bar, and how I sued him for $500,000. But that's for the final part. If you want to know how an engineer can outplay an entire corporation, stick around. And don't forget to hit like if you enjoy my storytelling. I'm gathering my thoughts to wrap up this saga. So, the time has come for the third story, the biggest and probably the sweetest of all. It happened during my full-fledged adult life when I was no longer a student or a bartender, when I'd become a real structural engineer with a degree, experience, and ambitions. I worked at a large company that designed commercial buildings across Texas. It was called Crane and Associates. My boss was Mr. Harrison, a man in his 50s with a perpetually displeased face that seemed frozen in a grimace of boredom. He wore expensive suits that hung on him awkwardly, and he always smelled of cigars and something sour. He was the type of boss who thought his subordinates were just cogs in a machine, and he was the chief engineer who knew best about everything. But I didn't complain. The job was stable, the pay was decent, and I had a room with a proper desk and good lighting. I worked there for almost 4 years, and during that time I never had any complaints. On the contrary, I delivered projects on time, often stayed late, helped colleagues, and was even nominated for the Designer of the Quarter award. I took second place, but it was still nice. Mr. Harrison would sometimes nod at me in the hallway and say, "Good work, Jake." I thought I was in good standing, that I had a future at this company. I even considered a promotion. A senior engineer position was opening up in the department, and I was preparing to apply. But there was one detail that made me special.
I'm disabled.
Yes, back during my military service, I suffered a serious back injury. I fell from a height during training exercises, leaving me with chronic pain and the need for periodic treatment. It didn't stop me from working, but sometimes I needed sick leave or the ability to work from home. I always provided all medical certificates, and the company knew about it from the very interview. They even signed a special agreement with me for reasonable workplace accommodation. It was a legal requirement, but they were cooperative. I could take up to 5 days of sick leave per month without losing pay, and I was allowed to work remotely when necessary. Everything was going fine until one day I got sick. Severe back pain, I couldn't even stand up straight. The doctor ordered strict bed rest for 3 days. I took sick leave, notified Harrison by email, and attached a scan of the certificate. He replied with a short, "Okay," and I didn't think much of it. I spent 3 days at home, took medication, watched movies, and even did a little work on a drawing, sitting in a chair with my laptop. Everything was legal. But on the 4th day, when I came into work, Harrison called me into his office. I walked in with a smile, thinking he wanted to discuss a new project. But he looked at me with icy seriousness. He said, "Jake, we have a problem. I've been informed that on one of the days you were on sick leave, you were seen at a bar on Main Street. You were sitting there with some guy drinking beer." At first, I didn't understand what he meant. I asked, "At a bar?" I was home. I couldn't have been at a bar. He shoved a printout into my hands. A blurry photo from a surveillance camera showing a guy in my jacket with my haircut, my build, laughing with another person. But it wasn't me. It was my twin brother Mark, who'd come to town and whom I hadn't even seen that day. We'd talked on the phone and planned to meet. But the meeting was canceled because I couldn't get out of bed. He went to the bar alone, wearing my jacket, which I'd lent him when he visited last time. I explained this to Harrison. I said, "Mr. Harrison, that's my twin brother. I can even show you a photo of us together." I opened my phone and showed him a picture of us both smiling. But he just shook his head and said, "That's not proof. Could be anyone. I have to go by the facts, and the facts say you violated sick leave protocol and defrauded the company. This is a serious offense." I tried to argue, but he'd already signed the termination order under the article Misrepresentation of Health Status. He handed it to me and said, "You can collect your things today." I walked out of his office with the paper in my hands. Couldn't believe it. For years of work, not a single complaint, and now this because my brother had a beer. But I didn't make a scene. I packed my belongings, said goodbye to my colleagues, who looked at me in bewilderment, and walked out of the office. Outside, I sat in my car and stayed there for a few minutes. There was no anger inside, only cold clarity. I realized this wasn't just a coincidence. Harrison had wanted to get rid of me, and he'd found an excuse. Later I learned that he was pushing his nephew into my position. A young guy with no experience, fresh out of college, who needed a job. Harrison used the situation to clear the spot for him. But he hadn't counted on one thing. I'm not the type to give up. I decided to fight. I wasn't a lawyer, but I knew that disability discrimination and wrongful termination were serious violations. I spent several days studying the laws, searching for an attorney. I was referred to Ms. Williams, a woman with an iron grip who specialized in employment disputes and had won cases against large corporations. I went to her with a folder of documents: my contract, the accommodation agreement, correspondence with Harrison, photos of my brother, sick leave records from all my years there. She reviewed everything, looked up and said, "Jake, we have a case. A strong one. They've violated not only labor laws but also state anti-discrimination statutes. Let's file a lawsuit." And we did. We filed suit against Crane and Associates and also personally against Mr. Harrison. We demanded compensation for wrongful termination, emotional distress, lost wages, and legal fees. The trial lasted nearly a year. Endless hearings, evidence gathering, witness depositions. The company hired their own lawyers, tried to bury the case, offered me a settlement. First they offered $20,000, I refused. Then $50,000, I refused again. $100,000, I said I wanted a trial. I didn't just want money, I wanted justice. I wanted Harrison to understand that you can't treat people like garbage, even if they have disabilities. The court hearings were intense. I testified, told them about my injury, how I'd always honestly performed my duties, and how I'd been betrayed. My attorney, Ms. Williams, was simply brilliant. She systematically dismantled witness testimonies, caught contradictions, made the company's lawyers nervous. She brought my brother Mark, who confirmed he was at the bar. Not me. She showed security camera footage that placed me at home that day. I'd gone out to take out the trash at 10 p.m., and it was captured by the home cameras. She also brought a psychiatrist expert who testified that discrimination causes severe stress. The climax came when Harrison took the stand. He tried to act confident, but Ms. Williams made him admit that he had not conducted an internal investigation, hadn't interviewed other employees, hadn't requested additional evidence. He simply accepted a report from an unknown informant and fired me the very next day. She asked, "Mr. Harrison, if you had acted in good faith, wouldn't you have given Jake a chance to explain and provide evidence?" He mumbled something about procedural expediency, but it was clearly a farce. When she asked about his nephew, who got my position 2 weeks after my termination, Harrison turned red and couldn't answer. The jury looked at him with contempt. The finale was sweet. The court ruled the termination unlawful and the company guilty of disability discrimination and labor law violations. We were awarded compensation, lost wages for the entire period from termination to trial, plus punitive damages for willful violation, plus emotional distress, plus all legal fees and attorney costs. The total came to $540,000. That was more than I'd earned in all my years at that company. I walked out of the courthouse with a light heart and a wide smile. But the money wasn't the main thing. Harrison was fired from the company for improper personnel management and ethics violations. His nephew couldn't hold the position. Without experience and without his uncle's backing, he failed his first major project. The company was required to reform its policies regarding employees with disabilities and introduced mandatory training for managers. They offered me my job back, but I refused. I'd already decided I would never work for someone who could so easily throw a person out on the street. I opened my own architecture firm and now work for myself, choosing my own projects and clients. If you think I feel gloating, you're wrong. I feel satisfaction. Satisfaction that the system worked, that the truth prevailed, that I didn't let myself be broken. And I also feel irony. Harrison thought I was quiet and harmless. He saw only a disabled person, not a human being. But I was an engineer, and engineers always calculate all the options. He made the first move and I made the last. And as they say, don't start something you can't finish. So there you have it, 3 stories. The first about headphones, about small-scale revenge that became an art form. The second about a girl who thought she could use me as an ATM and paid the price. The third about a boss who paid $500,000 for his greed. Each of them taught me something important. The first, that sometimes small injustices require a response, even if it seems petty. The second, that trust must be earned, and sometimes it's better to check a person out than to regret it later. The third, that the law isn't just words on paper. It's a shield that can protect you if you know how to use it. But the most important thing I took away from all of this is the understanding that revenge, carried out with a cool head and a slight smile, isn't just an act of retribution. It's the art of living. You don't become a slave to resentment. You turn it into a tool. You don't hate your enemies. You just teach them a lesson. And if they learn it, the world becomes a little better. If not, they'll keep getting new lessons until they understand. I don't regret what I did. I'm not proud of it in the banal sense, but I accept it as part of myself. The part that won't let itself be broken. You know what else I realized? People are often afraid to seem vengeful because society teaches us that forgiveness is the highest virtue. But forgiveness shouldn't be weakness. Forgiveness is when you let go of the grudge for your own sake, not for the sake of the one who wronged you. And if you need to teach a lesson to do that, then teach it. But do it in a way that makes you laugh. Because when you laugh, you don't give away your power. When you cry or scream, you become a victim. But when you smile, you're in control. I now live in my office in downtown Austin, working on projects for small hotels and restaurants. I have a dog I adopted from a shelter, and she's always happy when I come home. I'm not married, but I'm seeing a wonderful woman who knows all my stories and loves me not for my money, but for my ability to smile even in tough situations. We laugh a lot, and I can see she respects my principles. She says I'm the most honest liar she knows, because I never lie to myself. And I think that's true. This story isn't a guide to action. It's just my experience. I'm not telling you to take revenge on everyone who steps on your toes, but I am telling you not to be a victim. If someone deceives you, don't stay silent. If someone uses you, don't let them. And if you decide to fight back, do it with a smile. Because life is too short to waste on hatred. But it's long enough to enjoy watching those who try to cheat you get what's coming to them. And believe me, it's a very entertaining spectacle. Thank you for listening to the end. I know it was a long story, but I hope you weren't bored. If you've been in a similar situation, write to me in the comments. I'm always happy to read and laugh along with you. And if you think I went too far, also write. I'm open to discussion. Maybe I did cross a line, but you know, when I remember these 3 cases, I don't see where I was wrong. I only see how I defended myself. And I defended not just my time and money, but my sense of self-worth. And that's worth it. Don't forget to subscribe to the channel, because I have a couple more stories I want to share soon. About neighbors who tried to rob me, and about a friend who betrayed me in business. And there will be plenty of laughter and justice there too. For now, hit like if you enjoyed this and see you in the next videos. Smile, don't let anyone push you around, and remember, real strength lies in keeping your composure in any situation. And I'm going to go. I have a drawing of a nice little cafe that's supposed to open in a month. Good luck to you, and may your justice always be sweet.